Alright, we are continuing with the endocrine system, and we're going to start off talking about the pituitary gland and hypothalamus, because these are very, very important glands in the endocrine system. So this hypothalamus pituitary complex is seen as kind of the command center of the entire endocrine system. It's going to create a lot of hormones that regulate the creation and secretion of other hormones in other endocrine organs in our body. So we really, really need these to be functioning optimally and properly. Sometimes the nervous system is going to signal some of this, especially through that hypothalamus, that needs to get translated into hormones. So really, really important component here. So the hypothalamus, which is located right here in this area, we'll learn this in lab at the very end of the semester, but here's a quick preview. So that hypothalamus and then is connected to the pituitary gland by the infundibulum. The infundibulum is not part of the endocrine system, but the hypothalamus and pituitary gland is. So that hypothalamus, again, integrated with both the nervous system and endocrine system. The pituitary gland is divided into the anterior and posterior pituitary gland, and each of those regions is going to create specific hormones that the other region will not create. The pituitary gland is going to sit in the sella turcica of that sphenoid bone that we just learned in lab a couple of weeks ago. And so the pituitary gland, this is going to come from certain parts of embryonic tissue. So the posterior pituitary gland is made up of neural tissue, so kind of part of that nervous system type tissue, and then the anterior pituitary gland is more glandular tissue that develops from the same tissue that the digestive tract is coming from. And so this is why these different regions of the pituitary gland are going to create different hormones, is because they have a different origin of their tissue types. So here are some hormones secreted by the pituitary gland. As you can see, the anterior pituitary gland is going to secrete a lot of different hormones. This is not all of them, but growth hormone is a big one. This is going to trigger body tissues to grow. So we're producing a lot of this in earlier life. So up until, 20s to 30s is when there's a lot of that growth hormone being produced. And then as we get older and start reaching our maximum potential for growth in height and stuff like that, then this hormone will slowly kind of decrease in production. Prolactin is another hormone secreted there. This is going to help produce milk for breastfeeding after birth. Thyroid stimulating hormone, we talked a little bit about that in the last video. This is going to trigger the thyroid gland to release its specific hormones. We have the adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, tells the adrenal cortex to release its hormones. There's another region of the adrenal gland that's signaled differently. We also have follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. This is going to trigger both ovaries and testes to produce their gametes, so sperm and egg cells. Luteinizing hormone, or LH. This is going to trigger androgen production by the gonads. Androgen is a specific type of hormone, and this is going to be testosterone and progesterone. And then on our posterior pituitary gland, one big hormone is antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. This is going to help signal the kidneys that we need to reabsorb water. So we filter out water initially in the kidneys just as a natural part of that process. And then we need the signal telling the kidneys, hey, you need to recollect that and save it. Posterior pituitary is also going to secrete oxytocin, which is going to be what signals the uterus to contract during childbirth. And then there is an intermediate zone in the pituitary gland, which is producing a melanocyte stimulating hormone. which is going to signal that melanin production in melanocytes, like what we talked about in the integumentary system videos. So that posterior pituitary is obviously going to be the more posterior part of this gland. That's where it's got its name from. Again, this is kind of an extension of some of the neurons up in the brain from the hypothalamus. We won't get into too much detail about that, but it is going to actually not produce hormones specifically, but actually store them. So more accurately, these hormones right here, ADH and oxytocin, these are hormones not being produced specifically by the posterior pituitary gland. They're being produced by the hypothalamus and then sent to the posterior pituitary gland to be stored for when they actually need to be used. All right, so we'll talk more about those hormones, oxytocin. We'll talk more about that when we do the reproductive system a lot later in the semester. But again, it's going to stimulate those uterine contractions, dilation of the cervix, and then we are going to also keep producing that after birth in smaller quantities, and that is going to help with breastfeeding and also kind of help that emotional bond form between parent and child, both males and females. So people with all makeups of chromosomes can produce oxytocin, and that's very, very normal. But people who are able to actually give birth, they are going to produce very, very large quantities of it during that childbirth process. Antidiuretic hormone, again, is signaling to the kidneys to take water back up. Another name for antidiuretic hormone is vasopressin, but we really need to keep, obviously, as much water as possible in the body, and so this is helping with that balance. There are certain drugs that can affect the secretion of that hormone, so alcohol consumption can actually prevent the release of ADH, which is actually going to increase urine production, because if we're blocking the release of that ADH, then we are going to be excreting a lot more water and getting rid of a lot more water, which means we have more urine produced, and that is what leads to dehydration and a hangover. So stay hydrated while you're consuming alcoholic beverages. There is a specific type of diabetes insipidus. This is not type 1 or type 2 diabetes, but this type of diabetes is actually characterized by this chronic underproduction of ADH that causes a lot of dehydration, and so this is going to also basically change the blood sugar levels because we are diluting that out with too much water, or not diluting it out, but we're increasing the concentration of that blood sugar because we don't have enough water in the bloodstream because it's being excreted too much still. And so diabetes insipidus can cause a lot of water issues and electrolyte imbalances, so not a great thing to have. The anterior pituitary, again, comes from the same tissue that the digestive system starts out as, and this is going to migrate towards the brain during fetal development. There's some different regions of the anterior pituitary gland. We're not going to get into details about that, but remember, posterior pituitary doesn't create hormones, it just stores them. But in the anterior pituitary gland, it is going to create and synthesize those hormones. All right. Secretion of hormones from this part of the pituitary gland is regulated by two other groups of hormones, though. Those hormones are secreted by the hypothalamus, which again is going to be up here, further up in this signaling pathway. And so it's going to make hormones that are going to act on the anterior pituitary gland, telling it, hey, you need to make more of this particular hormone. And so we are going to get what's called the hypophyseal portal system, is what's happening here, and this is what is going to allow those hormones to get from the hypothalamus into the pituitary gland. And that is why we have these little blood vessels in here, to get those hormones moved around, because that is how our hormones get through our body, is being released through our bloodstream. We talked a little bit about the hormones synthesized in the anterior pituitary gland: growth hormone, TSH, that thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, FSH, LH, prolactin, all that kind of stuff. These are all referred to as tropic hormones because they either turn on or off the function of other endocrine glands. So trope means turning, so that's where it got that name from. All right, so here's our summary. So we are releasing hormones from the posterior pituitary. That ADH, antidiuretic hormone, is going to act on kidneys and sweat glands as well as the circulatory system, so blood vessels. This helps with water balance again. We are releasing that oxytocin to the reproductive system to trigger contractions, among other things. And so issues with those are obviously going to be problematic. For our anterior pituitary hormone, we have that growth hormone again, which is down here, represented right here. But as you can see, we've got that one step before it from where we're getting different signals from the hypothalamus. So we have, you see this GnRH, that is gonadotropin releasing hormone. So this is a hormone from the hypothalamus that is signaling the anterior pituitary gland to release some sort of gonadotropic hormone, which are going to be hormones that act on the gonads, hence the gonado part of gonadotropic. And so those are going to turn on or off the signaling there. So gonadotropic releasing hormone is going to control luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and a couple others, but those are the two big ones. This is thyroid releasing hormone, TRH, which is going to signal the production of thyroid stimulating hormone, which is going to signal the thyroid gland to release T3 and T4, those thyroid hormones which regulate metabolism. So this is a very, very complex system, as you can see. Down here, that prolactin and growth hormone each have their own things that are being regulated from the hypothalamus. Prolactin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone. Clearly these are very originally named hormones, but we also have some inhibition hormones here. So prolactin inhibiting hormone and growth hormone inhibiting hormone are going to act there. And then our adrenocorticotropic hormone right there to act on the adrenal glands is being controlled here by, I don't remember what this one stands for. I know it's going to be a releasing hormone. I don't remember what the C stands for off the top of my head. I think it's probably some sort of corticotropic or something like that, because we are acting on the adrenal cortex here. And we will continue in the next video talking about the thyroid gland specifically.